Welcome to the show. My name is Clash Ruddy, and it's Friday night. On Friday night here at African Media Australia on African Knowledge Show, we discuss the African mindset. We've had this series for about 6 weeks now, and we talk about a variety of topics that have to do with the factors that influence the African mindset. So you'll discover my guest in just a moment, straight after this. Thank you very much. The topic of our discussion tonight is China money. What does it mean for Africa? We know that China is aggressively investing or pouring money into Africa, and not just in many other parts of the world as well. But we want to sort of understand what it means for the African continent, whether there are reasons to worry or there are reasons to celebrate that we have a new partner for economic development. So to discuss this topic with me, I've got the usual culprits and a new one, Dr. Matthew Mabefam, anthropologist with Melbourne University. Katin Nandola, he is an author who also speaks on self-confidence. Mustafa Barry is an engineer and a community advocate. Eugene Ullman, who is a documentary maker, and he lives in Sydney and travels extensively through Africa where he does his work. And we have a new contributor, John Coley, who's a TAFE teacher here in Melbourne. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you tonight?
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Fabulous.
You know that those of us in Melbourne, this is the first day of freedom. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
You see that freedom.
Yeah.
It looks like they've given us a little bit more freedom now, but how long is it going to last? And is it really freedom? Anyway, this is not a topic for tonight.
Yeah.
Just to say that at least we can say thank you to Daniel Andrews, who's giving us this opportunity. But I don't know, I don't trust that he may not change his mind very soon. Anyway, gentlemen, we're talking about China money, and I'll start with a simple question: is China money in Africa good or bad? Anybody can start. I don't
Well,
like
look, I
sound.
think what I'm gonna do, maybe I'm just gonna jump in. Look,
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the question whether exchange and trade is good or is not good. I think eventually the answer is yes. It just depends on what strategies we have in terms of making sure that in those kind of exchanges that we have the best terms of the exchange that works in favor of our people. Now, whether our leaders are doing that adequately or not, that's the question, But I think kind of in principle, it's good. Now it's just a matter of knowing how we as Africans are managing those opportunities.
Okay. Yep. That's Barry. And well, if you want me to ask any of you to speak, then I'll start doing that. If you don't want to jump in.
I'll jump in
Yeah.
and just say, well, I think China has some reasons why they've got some strategic interests in Africa, and I would like to imagine they're not helping us because they want to help us. They're helping us because they want access to our natural resources, as well as the oil, the gas. We've got a lot of resources that China wants to be part of as well. And I think also just having political legitimacy. The Chinese government believes that strengthening, of course, they call it the Sino-African relations, helps raise China's own international influence as well. But I know for sure, I don't think they're helping us because they're helping us. They're helping us because they have strategic reasons behind it.
Okay, they're helping us because they have strategic economic interests. But
yeah, and that's exactly true. Let me just jump in again. I'm sorry. Katinda, is very true. I don't like the terms they're helping us. No one is helping us. No one is helping no one. everyone who is coming, whether they call it help or whatever and all that. And we should probably refuse that kind of vocabulary when it comes to Africans. Everyone is saying that like Africa is begging, Africa needs help and all that. We actually don't. You know, people like you said, Katinda, they actually come into us, but strategically they have interest in our resources, in what we have. Otherwise, we don't need anyone's help. You know, we need cooperation, we need trade, we need exchanges that got kind of a win-win kind of scenario in it. That's all what we need. They have strategic interests. We need to have strategies around how to defend the interests of our people. You know, and this long-held kind of view, Eurocentrist view that Africa needs help, Africans need assistance and all that, we should start categorically refusing that, you know, because it's demeaning. It's actually not something that actually doesn't actually reflect the truth. It's more actually the opposite.
Okay.
I think that's correct, because I think that there's a lot of propaganda that is being generated mainly from the West about this thing about, you know, China is the new colonizer, China wants to take over, China has ulterior motives, China this, China that. And I think that it's a bit strange. It's a bit like saying to somebody, you're not doing this job just because you want to help, you know, the company. You're doing it, you have an ulterior motive, you want money. You know, I think it's a bit weird to kind of even be surprised that a trade partner or a partner in any kind of project, you know, isn't going to be there because they have a motive to get, you know, to benefit themselves. That's the system, that's the economic system that we have. The question is, as Mustafa said, the question is what deals are being negotiated, what is being agreed upon, and you know, and how are the African parties in these deals, the governments and the local companies, how are they protecting their people, the workers, the resources, the cities, the environment, and so on?
Cool.
If I can also
Yes, you can jump in.
Yes, I want to say that we have come of age that exclusionary strategy is no longer the way to go. And by the nature of global interaction, we as African countries, it's necessary for us to engage with other global communities. And China is just one of those global communities that we are engaging with. The question as to whether China's money is good or bad is neither black or white answer one can give, but to situate everything in perspective, to build upon what my colleagues have just said. China knows what it wants in Africa, and it goes to Africa for that, which there's nothing wrong in it itself, in principle. The question we need to be asking ourselves is, do our leaders or those that we've elected to represent our countries, do they know what they want for their countries, and can they engage with China at that level to be able to get a good deal for their people, to be able to get a good deal for the products that China is engaging with or China is purchasing? I think that's where the question is. And if we interrogate further, we want to have a glimpse of whether that kind of interaction is good or bad. But I believe that we can find both good and bad in that kind of relationship, which is normal.
Also, I think it's really important to point out, it's just very important to remember that this is not a monolithic thing that we're talking about. When we say what is Chinese money, there's aid from the government because they want to have a certain relationship with African governments. There's private contractors, Chinese contractors that are, you know, fulfilling, you know, building things because they've been hired. There's Chinese immigrants that are just moved to Africa and they're starting small businesses and doing their own thing. So all of this kind of gets conflated into like China, you know, because people just look at this and think, oh, you know, this is this huge entity that's taking over. But in fact, there's all these very, very different things that are going on, and they shouldn't all be mixed together.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So I would like to jump into. Thank you guys for inviting me into this group that you've been discussing lots of stuff about Africa. Just to give my own perspective in terms of Sino-Africa trade deals or infrastructure building and all that, I would like to say that, there's always a difference between the way every country in Africa does some deals or agreement with China, and some countries are a little bit transparent in the way they do their things, in the way they sign their deals, and the people from that country or those countries tend to be aware of what's happening, whereas in other countries the deals are done in very shadowy way, in which no one really knows what's happening between the government and the Chinese government and stuff like that in terms of the agreements that they sign. So that's where you find the nationals of those countries complaining, not having good relationship with the Chinese who are participating in the construction. Like, for example, I'll give an example of countries like, for example, Kenya, where I come from. So there've been some kind of lukewarm relationship between the Chinese who are working there and the locals, and the issue has been always, we don't understand what is really happening. What's the deal? What's the deal like? How did they sign the deal? Why is it that the money that was agreed at the beginning ended up being more than that? So there's that kind of agreement that is not really very clear. They're not very clear. Another thing that I also want to say is the Chinese have come in not with the intention to support African countries in terms of calling out on corruption. So they sort of interested in only, doing the deals with the government and constructing structures here and there. But when it comes to corruption that are happening in the countries that they are working in, they don't really voice, anything about what's happening there, which is contrary to what used to happen when the Western countries were doing business with African countries in the 60s and 70s. Another issue that I also wanted to raise was the issue of the approach that the Chinese are also doing business in Africa, where they start with projects, and then eventually, when the projects are over, they continue running those projects instead of empowering the locals to take over. So they start thinking that they don't really trust the locals, that they are able to run some of those, like, for example, the railways that they have set up, running the railway system and all that kind of thing. So that also becomes an issue, because the locals feel that they are being shortchanged, because, for how long are they going to be there? And then also doing small businesses that locals are supposed to be doing, especially for those Chinese people who have been working in the railway or building structures, and then eventually when the project is over, some remain around and do some other business that the locals are supposed to be doing. So they make the locals become unemployed, something like that. Thank you.
Yeah, can I probably just very quickly, sorry, Clyde. Two things I wanted to highlight in what John has said. I don't totally agree with some of the stuff in terms of what we're saying, that the Chinese are coming. I think at the end of the day, we shouldn't kind of offload the responsibilities of our government when it comes to defending our interests to the Chinese. If the Chinese have a contract with our governments, it's the responsibility of our governments to make sure that there is a transfer of technology. When it's coming to who to employ, the kind of skills that they're bringing in, it's the responsibility of the government to make sure that our people work alongside the Chinese as part of the contract, so that they can learn and get the trade, at least to build something like that in future, at least to be able to maintain the infrastructure that they have built. That's one thing. So in that case, it's our government responsibility, that our government that is not doing what they should be doing in defending our interests. The second thing is, when we're talking about the Chinese not kind of caring about corruption and all that, coming and just building and going what the Western countries were doing. But look, let me tell you one thing. I come from Senegal, which is a French, formerly colonized country, colonized by France. If you think the Chinese are bad in that regard, wait until you start dealing with the French, okay? Because the thing is, like, at the moment, we all seem to have visibility of what China is doing, but no one seems to have visibility of what the French have been doing in the so-called Francophone countries for the last 50, 60 years, We had also the most shadowy kind of shady deals that you can imagine between the relationship between France and our countries. You know, you can call it robbery or whatever, but what the Chinese are doing, what we are actually saying that the Chinese are doing in those African countries is nowhere near what the French have been doing in the last 6 years in our countries. You know, so until you guys get to know what exactly the deals behind the relationship that are between our countries and France's independence, you would be actually very shocked in terms of what's going on there. To me, the Chinese are a picnic compared to what the French have been doing for the last 6 years. You know, yes, they don't kind of call out corruption or whatever, but let me tell you, most of the Western countries don't care about corruption. They come at the end, in the contrary, they actually enforce corruption. They use the system in order to get more control. In our countries, for example, the French have corrupted the system in such a way, since independence, the people who have ruled our countries are always people who have been mandated by France to win the elections. You know, if you are a leader who can put into questions what the interests of the French, they would either eliminate you, kill you, or find a way of getting rid of you. That's what's been going on for the last 6 years. You know, they involved in the heart of the system, and they corrupted the system, and they have actually controlled the system in such a way we are actually in hostage. You know, and I think that we need to look at and have a balanced view about that and see what our leaders can do and learn what happened in the past and frame relationship with China in a way that can be beneficial to us. You know, but it doesn't look like that they're learning anything.
That's the next question. Given what we've had as a economic relationship with the West and everything we've learned over the last 60 years or so, have African leaders learned enough in order to be able to frame their relationship with China in a way that is different, or are they just kind of repeating the same thing that has been happening with Western government?
I think if I can come in there, to give a few reflections and to also make a connection with what John was saying earlier. And I really like the point that Mustafa also highlighted, that we need to really unpack these issues very well before we say they're not calling out some of those issues. And my main issue is neither the place of the West or China to deal with moral issues in our country. It is the responsibility of the citizens and the leaders of our countries who are supposed to deal with that. And we have the agency to deal with that. So I would not want any foreign element in any of these countries to be calling in for such things. And besides, China uses two frameworks to engage with Africa. They have the political framework and the economic framework. And the political framework is to not engage in the political dealings of that country. So that is the policy that they use. So if that is a policy that they're guided by, then they are not mandated to engage with the internal political state of any of the African countries that they are engaging in. On the question of whether our leaders have learned anything with interacting with the West, I would say yes, our leaders have learned something. They've not yet gotten to where we want, and they can do better, and they are currently operating below expected level. And I'm saying that because just for the mere fact that we have an authority that we can engage with in itself is good enough. You know, if we only have one actor that we engage with as we used to engage with Europe or America, that is problematic. With China coming into the landscape, it gives leaders the opportunity to be able to choose which of them that they actually want to interact with. And that agency given to the countries, or that agency that African countries are beginning to exercise, is a good thing. The next thing I would like to say is that leaders, we need to get into the core of the contracts that, or the kind of businesses that we have, or we engage with China as a country and Chinese individuals who work in these countries. Chinese basically operate two kinds of contracts in these countries. We have build, operate, and transfer, and build and transfer. So if your government gets into a contract with China where they say that, look, this is the cost of the contract, we do not have the money. You build, operate, and when you recoup your money, then you now hand over the project to us. And that is the agreement. We cannot therefore now blame China that why is China operating these businesses even after they finish? That was what the contract was. So we need to rather be asking our leaders, in which way are they engaging with China, you know? And when we are able to get to the crux of that, then this we will not be blaming Chinese too much of their interaction. We should be blaming our people and the way they are engaging with China. So that's what I would say for now.
Okay. Now, and anybody can speak after that, but I will bring a new question into this. Obviously, it's our leaders' primary responsibility to ensure that any contract that is signed by any partner, that matter whether it's China or Western countries or anybody else, is ultimately for the better interest of the population. But we know that many times they have failed to do that. And then you have China, obviously, who is very aggressive in its, sort of ascertaining its power everywhere on the global stage. And somehow we also expect them to have a level of, ethics that, demonstrating that they can actually do business both for their own interests as well as interests of the country. But we see, for example, when they go there, they have these contracts. They give a lot of money, but then the contract, even when it's done, I guess what I'm trying to say is that this contract always favor Chinese more than the African countries, and our leaders are not doing anything to change that. But should we expect that China should also have some responsibility in ensuring that they can give the best, as they do business with Africa, they give the best to Africa as well? There's a bit of background noise. I'm not sure.
Somewhere.
Okay, let's go.
I think
leaders,
like it depends I think it depends on what the agreement is. Like if the agreement is that a Chinese company has been contracted to build, a piece of infrastructure, then their responsibility is that they build a piece of infrastructure that is of good quality and lasts and does what it's supposed to be doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know, for example, that over the last decades, a lot of Western countries have been outsourcing manufacturing to China because in China the wages are lower, people get paid less, so things can be manufactured cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Now Ethiopia, for example, is trying to set itself up as this outsourcing place for manufacturing, and
Yes.
their actual selling point is that they have no minimum wage. And so production can be even cheaper than China. So if you have a country that is actually like basing their business model on the fact that, that they have no minimal wage or any kind of guaranteed working conditions for their workers, then you have to ask, how is it China's problem? If this country is not respecting workers' rights or human rights and so on, how is that suddenly China's fault? I mean, another issue is that, just using Ethiopia as an example, I was there quite recently, and, I don't know, China recently, because there was like, news that there was, oil and stuff in Ethiopia. So China came in and built a lot of infrastructure for the Ethiopians completely free, like not as a loan, not as anything, just no strings attached, just with this idea that, if they find this oil, then China's going to be in a good position to get a good deal on it because China doesn't have those sorts of natural resources. And if you see how Addis Ababa looks now, the Chinese have built a light rail system, which is amazing. It works beautifully. There's all these buildings all over Addis Ababa. I mean, those Chinese cities that like yesterday was a village and today is like a city of 25 million people with skyscrapers built overnight. That's what Addis Ababa looks like. And everywhere you go, you see these signs, construction by the China-Ethiopia Friendship Company and so on and so forth. And the whole city looks insane. It looks like this crazy Chinese building site. All the people that have lived there the entire lives get lost because they don't recognize anything when they drive around. But the question is, how is this China's fault? If the Ethiopians are saying, come and build this stuff for us, and they're not talking to their architects and their town planners and their environmental scientists about how to protect their historical things and their environment and so on, why, you can't blame China for that, is my point. Like they also have to have a policy about how they deal with this new friend that they have, who's yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's actually a very fair point. It's not China's problem to make sure that the interests of every African country is preserved, but they come and do business and they want to get the most out of it.
I'm not defending China. They have problems. It's not a free country. They have problems with workers' rights and democracy. I'm not defending, but again, it's like you can't expect them to then worry about those things in Africa when they don't worry about those things in their own country.
But the problem is like we can't even blame China after more than 100 years or even hundreds of years of cooperating with the West. What have you got in return? What have you got in return after all these years, decades, and even centuries of cooperation with Europe? Do you have anything back from that? Nothing. It's only words, freedom, democracy, and all that. Are you going to eat that? So I think the bottom line is we need to make sure that our people, our leaders, and our leadership is accountable to people in such a way that people won't go and sign contracts without people knowing exactly what those contracts are about. Because at the end of the day, we need to restore the accountability, and it has to come down to people to understand who is doing what and why it is being done that way. Until we do that, you will have always corrupt leaders who will go and sign like non-beneficial deals to the people and will care only about themselves. And I'm tempted actually to say that we need to review, if we're talking people are complaining about China, then we need to complain about everything and review our contacts with everybody, not only with the Chinese. Because if you look closely with all the countries that we have contact with, whether it's in mining and whatever, those mining contracts are all actually corrupt contracts where 90% or more than 90% of the resources are going to the West, and our people end up with nothing. That's what's been happening for the last few hundred years, and that has to change.
Okay, that has to change. John, go ahead. Sorry, you were muted before. Go ahead.
Okay. So if we say that we don't blame China in all these contracts that they are doing in most African countries, I think we will be a little bit naive, because China, remember, is not a third world country anymore. We have to agree with that. Although their system is still kind of communist, in terms of the politics, but when it comes in terms of economy, they're actually capitalists. All right. So, but when it comes to when they sit on the table with other Western countries that are developed, China should actually be called into question for some of the things that they're doing in poor countries like Africa. It's just like a rich person trying to take advantage of a poor person, a poor guy. So what I'm trying to say is the West have done their share in terms of exploiting resources in Africa, in terms of an equal trade and all that thing, since independence or even before independence. But we should not continue to look at China as if China is not doing the same thing what the West was doing. But what we need to do now is to look at the blame that China has and the blame that African leaders have in terms of how they do they sign their agreements with these countries. And look, if you compare, I said something before, a point about corruption, and someone, I'm not sure, one of you guys said that the Western countries are not very keen on corruption that's happening in Africa. It's the same as what China is doing now. But I think if you are to compare the two, I think the West sometimes have, they are supporting some of the, advocates for change in Africa, activists that, want to bring changes in Africa and all that. And they're spending a lot of money, which may not come directly from the government, but comes from some of the departments or some of the organizations that are from the West. It sometimes is supported by the government as well, Western governments. China, on the other side, there is not even one single organization or advocacy group that they are supporting in Africa for changes to happen, because changes cannot happen just by leaders changing by themselves. It has to start from the people. The people have to ask questions, to ask governments why they are doing all these things in a wrong way for 70 years. And look, tell you what, a lot of these guys that are in government went to study in the West, and they have learned about the, democracy, how to look after resources, how to look after government funds and all that kind of. They know all these things that are happening in the West, and they love it. What they talk about the West.
But why don't they apply it, John? Why don't they apply it? Why don't they apply it when they go to our countries?
I'm coming. And then they go back to Africa, they become ministers, and they do the opposite.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Because they are in power.
Let me interject here, John. So now tell me, if you're saying, like, in terms of the NGOs that are helping fight corruption and all that, what I wanted to say in that, it's not the responsibility of the NGOs to fight corruption. It's our responsibilities as people. The Western NGOs that are working in our country, they don't do it for free. They're not doing it because they're nice. They got their own agendas. We need to make sure that we have our own strategy in fighting corruption ourselves, without mortgaging that responsibility to either the Western countries or the NGO that are working in our country, because they actually are not working for us, they're working for themselves. We need to look at that in a very critical way. I don't trust these organizations. I don't think we should be putting our hope into this organization in order to fight corruption. If they were doing the right thing, there wouldn't be any corruption in our country, because they've been there for such a long time. And go and look what the benefit that they have delivered. I'll let you continue. Sorry.
Okay, so I agree with you. Look, I agree with you that sometimes some of those organizations have their own agenda. But to tell you, if you are going to look at the level of support that they have given to local NGOs and local activists, like, for example, I talk about Kenya, for example. If there was not that support, financial support from the West, I'm telling you, there would be very little changes that have occurred, especially with the constitutional changes and advocating for gender rights and all this kind of thing. If there was no funding from out there, you would get nothing from the government, because the same government would never support those organizations that are actually working to change things from the ground. Because the government wants to continue. Most of the governments, I say, they want to continue sitting on the people, exploiting them. At the end of the day, they are the ones that are benefiting. The common man is not benefiting. And look, we have about 70%, 60% of illiterate people in Africa. They don't understand a lot of things. And some of these governments like people to be in that state where they don't really understand a lot of stuff, so that they continue ruling. The elites continue ruling. Whereas the poor who are illiterate and poor stay in that state, the same position. So when you look at those organizations that are giving them support, setting up education in the local areas, they are actually being funded by the West.
No,
that's
where I have a problem.
Yeah.
I have a problem.
Sorry,
I'm sorry. I have a problem with that. I'm sorry. I have a problem with that, because we try to give too much power to these NGOs and all that, and that shouldn't happen. Citizens' right, we need to work with our people to make sure that they understand their rights. They can do and fight for their right without having to rely on NGOs who have their own agendas. All of these NGOs, I'm not saying some, all of them do have their agendas. And we need to make sure that gradually that we are independent of those fundings and all that. We can do our things. And the illiterate people that you're talking about, those people understand what's going on. They probably haven't been to school like us, but they do understand what's going on. They understand what is good, what is not right. They have political. If you educate them to understand the political rights, they can fight for the rights.
I do understand the point that both of you are trying to make. Obviously, we understand that even though on the government level, the West and China are pretty much the same. They always want to get the best they can from Africa, whatever way. But at least from the West, you have other civil society organizations and NGOs that kind of do a little bit more in terms of trying to help bring change in Africa, while that is almost non-existent in China. But I guess fundamentally, this whole thing comes down to the mindset of our political leaders. Why is it that we're always trying to find money outside? Why can't we be financially sufficient? We've seen leaders who are actually doing quite well in trying to, raise money from within the country to be able to develop the economy. You know, Magufuli, the late Magufuli, before he died, he didn't go anywhere in any outside country. He was able to transform his country and his economy, and there are many others. But why are many of the other leaders always looking outside to trying to get money for their programs? So that's a fundamental question there. Why aren't these leaders able to structure things in a way that they'll be able to be self-sufficient to finance their programs and develop the economy?
I think. Okay,
Sorry,
go ahead.
No,
But you go ahead.
please. No, please.
You go
Well,
ahead.
I think.
You've been a little quieter.
Well, I've been observing. So basically, I think, like, Clyde, you're saying, why our leaders not thinking of, not obviously always asking for help. I believe it's also out of habit. They got used to getting things handed to them. So it's easier than thinking about how to do it. And I guess it's lack of training the local people, because we all believe that people are educated and they can actually do the work. There's a lot of things. We've got all the resources there. We've got the resources, we've got the oils, we've got everything. But we're just sidelined and we don't have good leadership. And because we don't have good leadership, obviously it looks easier to just get aid from people who look like the experts. And that's why we have so many expatriates too.
Yeah, sure. That's good.
I think that's two different things. I think there's a difference between, I agree with you 100%. I think that there's a problem in Africa of hiring expatriates for jobs that local people are very qualified to do, because it gives a certain prestige. There's a certain sort of mentality that's attached to that. So I agree with you. But I think that that's somewhat different to trying to attract foreign investment and trying to attract international and financial partners. I don't really see that that's a problem if you, again, as people have said, if you negotiate deals that are advantageous to yourself and your people. I think that not many countries can be self-sufficient financial. I mean, how many countries in the world don't have foreign investment and foreign entities coming to, and sometimes, I mean, there's an example that I heard recently, which ties into our discussion last week. There's an example that I heard recently when the IMF forced Greece to sell the main port of Athens, the port of Piraeus, to China. And they, maybe you know this story, I only heard it recently, but they negotiated a terrible contract. Basically, China was going to have something like 70% of the port of Athens. And they didn't have to, like, all the conditions were in their favor, and they were going to hire subcontracted workers who had no rights and so on. And then the Syriza government came to power. This was like 2015 or something. The Syriza government came to power, and they looked at this contract and they said, this is terrible. So they went back to China and they said, look, like, yes, we have a contract. Yes, legally we have to do this, but we want to renegotiate this contract. We want you to only own 51%. We want you to guarantee that you will invest X number of millions of dollars, blah, blah, blah. We want you to guarantee that you will mainly use local skills and local experts. And you have to use labor unions that will use collective bargaining to negotiate. And the Chinese said yes, they agreed, and they renegotiated the contract. I don't know if America would have done that, or if Britain would have done that, or if France would have agreed to do that. So I think, I do think that there's nothing wrong with having international investment and international cooperation. I don't think any country should avoid that necessarily. But the question is, how do you do it and what your interests are and so on. And also, I have to disagree with you about John Magufuli, by the way, because I don't think he transformed very much. I think that, he was someone who was a populist. I think that he was someone who did a few very big gestures, but I don't think he transformed the economic system of his country in any meaningful way. And I don't think he could. I don't think that, given the current system that we had, I don't think realistically he was in a position to do that.
But at least he didn't go out trying to beg money from anybody, and he was still able to undertake major infrastructure project without
it's
having
not begging
to...
money. It's not begging money to say we're open for investment, we're open for partnerships. I don't think that's the same as begging money. I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think we need to get rid of the aid mindset. I think, like Katinda was saying earlier, the fact that we are so much used to aid, that mindset had to stop. You know, we need to talk more about cooperation, about partnerships and all that, because at the end of the day, aid hasn't developed anyone. In actual fact, it's not aid. It's just a doorway. It's a pathway for exploitation. So we need to change that mindset. We need to change the vocabulary. We need to change the language.
And before I get,
can I jump in a little bit? Can I jump in a little bit?
Just a moment. I think Dr. Matthew has been wanting to jump in, but before he does, and then we'll go to you, John. Just a comment from one of the viewers. He says it's time for African leaders to take responsibility for where Africa is and make their economy stronger, so that they can have bargaining power when dealing with China, etc. If you don't have bargaining power, you will also be disadvantaged. Isn't that fundamentally the problem in many of these contracts? Dr. Matthew, go ahead, and then John, you
I've listened keenly to the contending and contesting arguments that have been played on this platform for today, and it just beats my imagination that we have to pitch China with the West to see who is better in terms of Africa's development. I think for me, that is not where the conversation should be. And for the fact that we are centering our conversation in between these two means that we ourselves have not moved beyond what we are actually criticizing. I think we need a different mindset that would actually be of one that we have to be looking at ourselves and how we can innovate ways or strategies to actually develop. I don't think I've said here before that at this century, it is time for us to exclude ourselves. That is no longer possible. We need to trade with other people. And I think we have to make a distinction between partnership and trade and aid. I think we are confusing the two, and that's where the issue is. There's nothing yet wrong with partnering or engaging with trade activities with people. Even Tanzanian president, he had to renegotiate some of the contracts that different entities had in his country. So
he did it quite well.
Yeah, so he did that quite well. So the point I want to make is that he didn't go begging for money, which is the mindset that we have to change. He renegotiated some of the contracts that was not good for his people. He didn't do as much as we expected, but at least he tried to renegotiate some of the contracts, right? So I think that's where the issue is. And I also kind of don't want us to appear as if we think that because, I don't know how to phrase this politically, that we have gone to school or we have sat in the classroom, then we are also at higher level as compared to other people who have not been to school. I've listened, I'm a grassroots person, and I've listened to people, and they are very much politically aware of what is happening within the context that they are. And it is kind of a little bit worrying if we think that because they have not been to school, then they don't know what is actually happening. I think for me, the point is, what do our leaders want? How do they engage with us? And then that is where the conversation needs to be. If you want to situate everything into a global perspective, China is now the leading supporter of scholarship for African students. And it took that lead in 2014 after France, which was leading. That is a lot of economic benefit that African countries are gaining from knowledge that a lot of people have gone to China to actually study and come back home. And they using those software to be able to help in different ways to support their countries. We do not account that. For that, China is the leading trade, not aid, trade partner with Africa. And it took over after US in 2014. No, in 2014 or 2009, up to today. It is only when you combine the whole of Europe together that it surpasses China. But if you take them country by country, China is the biggest trading partner with Africa. I think the concept that we use, we have to unpack and disentangle it from what? Aid. It is when we talk about aid that it's a different conversation that we can have. But when it comes to trade and the way China engages with Africa, I think, and that is the whole thing. Then unless we are going for the ideology of what? Neoliberalism, and we are saying that it's not a good thing and we have to throw it away. It becomes successful because they have stood apart from others. And they've stood apart from others because of the strategies that they use. So it needs, people need to be on the table and argue war. I had a Chinese colleague who was my office mate, and one day I was presenting a paper on the relationship between China and Africa. Is it a new form of colonization? And he came to me and we had an honest conversation. And he told me the logic of China, that if China is bringing $100 to a country and your politicians are willing to take 30 and let 70 go to the country, they don't actually mind. After all, the whole $100 had gone into the country. So that's how China thinks, and that's how it engages with business. So I don't think that China is the problem. I think that our people is the problem. And if we hold them responsible, we need to be engaging at that level. But I think that I'm just happy that there are alternatives for African countries to engage with. And one of the things that last point I'll make is that China is a country. Africa is 54 countries. So we should not speak as if China and Africa are at the same level. There are different countries that are engaging with China at an individual level. And there are a lot of things that come to play here. Power, money, and everything. It comes to play here, and we should not forget about all this. These are my conversation, my comments.
Okay, we're just about to finish. We just will take one last comment from John, and then that'll be the end. John, please go. You got 1 minute.
I have two things I wanted to talk about. The first one is when it comes to development, developing a country, especially third world countries, you can't talk about trade alone. You have to talk about trade and aid as well. And the reason why I'm saying this is, countries that have had, like after Second World War, we had countries that were really devastated by war, and they had to get some financial support to bring up the development of those particular countries. Like Germany would be one of them and others. But look, when that particular money was given, you could see, or you can actually see progression in terms of development in those particular countries for those years since 1914, 45, 49, something like that, up to now. Whereas Africa has been getting aid since 1960, but you can see very little development in terms of how much money has been given in aid. And there's a lady who was written about aid. Aid is not actually good for Africa. It's not, because we've been getting this aid and we are not actually using it properly. So maybe we need to have another conversation. I don't disagree with that. I agree with that. But what I was trying to say is that aid and trade, the two of them help a country to grow economically. So we can't just talk about trade alone without looking at aid as well. For poor countries like those ones in third world places, we need the two of them. But aid has failed in Africa, but has also done very well in other parts of the world. Japan is one country that was given a lot of aid. But look at it's been number 2 economically. America and then Japan is number 2. Now it's being overtaken by China, of course. But what I'm trying to say is also that when I talked about poverty and illiteracy in Africa, I say that it contributes to a lot of countries having poor leaders, because what happens is that leaders who are educated or elites come in, they use their money, they use they actually tell lies during election time, and they end up being voted into leadership, but then they don't actually do anything to help those people to become better economically or to improve themselves. So, and they keep on electing the same people every year in, year out. So the idea of illiteracy and poverty, I'm talking about that as contributing to poor leadership in Africa. Because, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. So it's not about people don't understand things. I didn't mean that. They don't understand. There's a level of things that they understand, but there's certain level of other things that they don't understand because of those limitations that they have.
Sure. I know there's a lot of things that can be said about this. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We might continue this conversation on another episode. There's still a lot that we need to do in terms of really changing, helping to change the mindset in Africa in relation to this whole trade versus aid issue, but not just a whole lot of things where, and I agree with many points that Barry has been saying about how our people. So it's basically, it's our job as Africans, both in the continent as well as in the diaspora, to do what we can to try to change the mindset and make sure that we can actually rely on our own efforts to develop our countries, but that doesn't mean we can't cooperate, we can't seek partnership, we can't negotiate deals with other countries, but primarily being able to be self-sufficient and watching what our leaders are doing. So thank you very much, all of you guys, for your contribution tonight. I appreciate your time, and we will continue this conversation on African mindset next Friday.
Thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you very much.
Thank you.
All right. For
Thank
those
you.
of you watching, as usual, please share the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you have something you want to share, contact us, and we may be able to assist you to make that available to the community. Until then, stay blessed and stay safe as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you.